Good evening, I'm Fana Sheh and you're tuning in to Awani Tonight. The Prime Minister announced the dissolution of Parliament. The road to GE15 begins. That's coming up. Prime Minister Dato' Sri Ismail Sabri Yaakob has announced the dissolution of Parliament, paving the way for a general election within 60 days from today. He also urged the heads of state governments, with the exception of Sabah, Sarawak, Malacca and Johor, to dissolve their respective legislative assemblies at the same time. The attention now shifts to the Election Commission for the setting of the dates for nominations and polling day soon.
Dengan ini saya ingin memaklumkan bahawa pada tengah hari semalam saya telah menghadap ke bawah duli Yang Maha Mulia Sri Paduka Baginda Yang di-Pertuan Agong Al-Sultan Abdullah Riayatuddin Al-Mustafa Billah Shah dan menyembah warkah permintaan kepada Baginda mengenai pembubaran Parlimen ke-14. Selaras dengan perkara 40/2/B dan perkara 55/2 Perlembagaan Persekutuan, ke bawah duli Yang Maha Mulia Sri Paduka Baginda Yang di-Pertuan Agong telah bertindak menurut budi bicara Baginda dengan memperkenankan permintaan saya supaya Parlimen ke-14 dibubarkan pada hari ini, Isnin 10 Oktober 2022.
The Yang di-Pertuan Agong Al-Sultan Abdullah Riayatuddin Al-Mustafa Billah Shah said he had no choice but to give his consent for the dissolution of Parliament due to disappointing political developments. His Majesty said this would allow for the mandate to be returned to the people for them to choose the next government. In a statement issued by the Comptroller of the Royal Household, Dato' Ahmad Fadil Shamsuddin, His Majesty hopes that the Election Commission will conduct the 15th general election as soon as possible, taking into account the southwest monsoon, which is expected to begin in mid-November. Ahmad Fadil said an unscheduled meeting was held last Sunday afternoon, where Prime Minister Dato' Sri Ismail Sabri Yaakob presented his wish for the Parliament to be dissolved. Meanwhile, all Barisan Nasional-led states will dissolve their legislative assemblies at the same time as the dissolution of Parliament, says BN Chairman Dato' Seri Ahmad Zahid Hamidi. However, Johor, Malacca and Sabah will be exempted as their legislative assemblies have not reached maturity.
Zahid said the decision to hold state elections simultaneously was for the Election Commission to save costs. Meanwhile, Perak Menteri Besar Datuk Sri Sarani Mohamad said he would also seek an audience with the Sultan of Perak to dissolve the State Legislative Assembly soon. Previously, PAS announced it would not dissolve its state legislative assemblies in Kedah, Kelantan and Terengganu. Pakatan Harapan also made the same decision in Penang, Selangor and Negeri Sembilan.
With the Parliament dissolved, we are only weeks away from choosing the next Malaysian government. Are Malaysians ready to vote? How will voter turnout affect the party's standing? Political analyst Professor Dr. Siva Murugan Pandian answers these burning questions.
If it's held before November 15, which is most likely, the turnout will be better than if it is held after November 15. As we were told, we may face the worst monsoon season ever. And I think compared to GE14, we may see less turnout because the momentum, the wow factor, the good feel factor does not compromise with any political parties. If you relook at the way it was campaigned throughout G14, we saw there were a momentum build until the election day, which we couldn't see just yet. And I think any government which is going to have election during flood season may lose credibility if it fails to manage flood effectively.
Other than that, Siva also touched on the low voter turnout factor, which may be advantageous to Barisan Nasional.
Normally, looking at the patterns throughout the 14 elections, if it is a low turnout, it is an advantage for Barisan Nasional if it is a high turnout, as what we saw in G14. For the first time, Pakatan Harapan could win because the turnout reached almost 80%. And if it is lesser than 70%, which I think would be the similar pattern as before G14, as for now, it will be an advantage for Barisan Nasional unless Pakatan Harapan or any other political coalition would be able to convince the young voters, especially the Undi 18, and also the first-timer, to come out and vote for themselves. I think the target now is about 30% of the fence-sitters, whether they would still evaluate until the 11th hour how they should focus on their voting pattern, who should they give their votes, whether they would be able to see a more stable and certain government after the general election. I think what worries most the political parties are not only the readiness, but to what extent they could minimize the internal sabotage, minimize the internal crisis, the internal bickering that could also bring down the votes that they expect from the voters.
After weeks of speculation and uncertainty over the timing of elections, we now know for sure snap polls are imminent. On Consider This, we ask our guests on what to expect in the lead-up to G15 following the dissolution of Parliament today. We go for a quick break. Stay tuned.
Ingin bersorak di perlawanan bola sepak terhebat? Kini anda boleh dengan 100 Plus. Jom bola dengan 100 Plus serta Ila sekarang.
Welcome back. Often described as the backbone of Malaysia's economy, SMEs account for over 97% of all businesses in the country. Moving forward, Dato' William Ng, chairman of the SME Association, says more can be done to allow these businesses to improve their productivity.
It's quite clear that we are besieged with low productivity. I think that is something that has been disturbing SMEs for the longest of time. And because of this low productivity, it results in very low profit margin. I think that is the main reason why many SMEs folded during the pandemic. Not so much because of the on-off MCO and so on and so forth, but more because of the low margin that most SMEs have. So it became very reliant on labor, hence the low productivity. I think moving forward, the government really should focus on how do we improve this low productivity by encouraging SMEs to digitalize and automate. And as I've said earlier, double deduction for investments into this area could be a start, but in many areas such as labor reform, I think that's very crucial, so as to enable wages to be tied directly to productivity rather than hours as it is currently being done. I think these are some of the things that we could have done better, and if we are to revisit the budget for some reason, we are hopeful that the government, whether the current one or the next one, would take some of this into consideration.
As the country recovers from pandemic shocks, more focus has been on powering the digital economy by resolving the digital divide. With several measures already outlined by the government last week, Professor Dr. Hafizali Iqbal Hussein shares what more is needed for an inclusive digital economy.
The first is probably the connectivity focus. The second is on the domestic technology-based companies. There's a lot of incentives for investment, as well as the final one is something which has been in the news a lot lately, especially is about cybersecurity measures and how the government plans to strengthen and enhance or plug any gaps in the current situation. Yeah. And I think personally, what has been interesting is that the SOCSO mandate, now it's been enhanced for gig workers, and the implementation is become feasible. Yeah, it's always been something a bit tricky to implement because you have now got a 80% subsidy from the government.
Hafiz Ali emphasized the need to support SMEs to digitalize with funds and cybersecurity measures.
This initiative by the government, I think about 2020, where they started the venture capitalist scene for digital economy startups, and they've continued it in this current budget as well. And you've also got the Cradle Fund, but in terms of the size, that can be a bit challenging, because when it comes to innovation, if you look at different countries across the world, you're going to see that this ecosystem that flourishes and drives innovation comes from the startups and the seed funds which are available. So that's going to be something that can be challenging in that sense. Okay. And another major challenge would be the cybersecurity implementation. The proposal was a step in the right direction, but going forward, I think there will be a need to focus more on micro and smaller enterprises. They don't necessarily have the financial capacity to implement cybersecurity measures.
Around 29% of Malaysians experience poor mental health in the workplace at any one time in their lives. To mark World Mental Health Day, we speak to Professor Dato' Dr. Andrew Mohanraj, President of the Malaysian Mental Health Association, on the importance of addressing psychological well-being in the workplace.
Without effective support, mental disorders or other mental health conditions in the workplace can affect a worker's confidence and identity at work, capacity to work productively, and the ease with which to retain or gain work. In Malaysia, studies prior to the pandemic have highlighted how productivity has been lost due to poor mental health at work in terms of presentism, absenteeism, and staff turnover. On a national level, the cost of mental health in the workplace to the economy was conservatively estimated to be 14.4 billion ringgit, or 1% of the GDP in the year 2018. Now, this may be a significantly higher figure by the year 2030 if mental health in working adults is not addressed.
Noting that all workers have the right to a safe and healthy working environment, Dr. Andrew said it is crucial for organizations to invest in mental health initiatives for their employees.
Work-related mental health conditions are largely preventable. Now, organizations can incorporate mental health awareness to create a healthy and productive environment that reduces stigma associated with mental illness. They can also increase mental health literacy at workplace and teaching the skills to managers and staff to safely and responsibly respond to co-workers with mental health concerns. Now, nurturing a culture of transparency in the workplace is very important, and perhaps it is the first step towards combating negative perceptions or associations of mental health problems in the workplace.
That is all we have for you on Awani Tonight. I'm Farhan Aceh. Thank you for watching.